We are going to quickly skim through the mouth parts of an insect and some other portions related to this as shown. So there is a group of appendages associated with the mouth which form collectively a feeding apparatus of an insect. The feeding organs constituting the feeding apparatus are commonly called the mouth parts. They include a labrum, a pair of mandibles, a pair of maxillae, a labium, an epipharynx attached to inner surface of the labrum, and a hypopharynx attached to ventral side of the labium. The hypopharynx is primarily formed from a fusion of a pair of lateral lobes, the superlinguae with a median lobe and linguae in the pterygotes. In Epterygota, on the contrary, the linguae and superlinguae are free from each other. These structures are variously modified among insects in relation to their feeding habits. Metcalf and co-authors in 1962 have classified the mouthparts into major 7 types: chewing type, rasping sucking type, piercing sucking type, sponging type, siphoning type, chewing lapping type, and degenerate or filter feeding type. So according to Snodgrass in 1935 to 57, all types of mouthparts are independently evolved in the insects without having remarkable phylogenetic significance. They are, moreover, evolved in accordance with the variable feeding habits. Among these, the chewing and the piercing and sucking types of mouthparts are greatly modified. The chewing type is subdivided into 3 types: grinding, grasping, and mandibulo-suctorial mouthparts. Similarly, the piercing sucking type is subdivided into 4 subtypes like hemipteran, anopluran, dipteran, and siphonopteran. Types of mouthparts. The chewing mouthparts, cutting and grinding food. This type represents most primitive complex of the feeding appendages, comprising a labrum, epipharynx, hypopharynx, and a pair of mandibles, a pair of maxillae, and labium. The labrum and labium form the upper and lower lips. The maxillae, the cheeks of the preoral cavity, while the mandibles are adapted for cutting and grinding the solid food material. The epipharynx as well as hypopharynx are membranous lobulated structures which push the food material into the true oral cavity. The pharynx. Such type of mouthparts are present in Epterygota, Paleoptera, Dictyoptera, Orthoptera, Coleoptera, and other insects feeding on the solid food material and are described in detail in the next chapter. Feeding mechanism. Mandibles are the principal mouthparts taking part in cutting and chewing mechanism of feeding. Each mandible is differentiated into 2 regions: apical region with fine pointed incisor teeth involved in cutting and tearing the food, while the basal region with flat molar teeth adapted for crushing or grinding the food into fine particles. The abductor and adductor muscles swing the mandibles mid-laterally so that they move in a transverse plane repeatedly. The maxillae, with the help of teeth and bristles on lacinate, move the food upward, and hypopharynx rotate the food forward and upward so that it comes in between the swinging mandibles. The saliva is released into the grinded food material and the mandibles are closed tightly. Thereafter, the maxillae are extended out and the hypopharynx is pulled down and backwards. The calli of maxillae act as scoops and sweep the food paste towards the real mouth. The dilated muscles of pharynx dilate the cibarium and pharyngeal cavity so that the food enters the foregut. So, clypeus, labrum, hypopharynx, cardo, mandible types, mendum, premendum, labial palp, glossa, lacinea, maxillary palp, paleo, paraglossa, gallia. These are the chewing mouthparts in Orthoptera insect. In carnivorous insect, the lacinate are used to capture the prey. Various types of chewing mouthparts are described, like grasping mandibular mouthparts. The mandibles are provided with a pair of large tubular mandibular glands and small abductors and large adductors. The maxillae, labium, and hypopharynx are united to form a large composite structure projecting behind the mouth like a thick upper lip called the maxillolabial hypopharyngeal complex. It bears spinneret at its tip. Basically, the organ is supported on hypostomal lobes of post-gaine. The wall of underlip complex is membranous. 2 lateral lobes represent maxillae distinctly. The median lobe is formed of labium and hypopharynx. The hypopharynx bears distally spinneret, a hollow spine having orifice of silk gland depth at its extremity. Such type of mouthparts are found in the Lepidopteran larvae. Then grasping sucking mouthparts. The mandibles are long curved fangs hinged to anterior lateral angles of head by dorsal and ventral articulations and thus work in a horizontal plane. They are found in some Neuroptera and Coleoptera such as Lady Pyridor disticid larvae. Mandibles, postmentum, stipes, maxilla, prementum, hypopharynx, spinneret, and labrum. Food canal, mandible, antenna, eye. The subtypes of chewing mouthparts: grasping mandibular lepidopteran larvae and mandibular suctorial antlion larvae. Each mandible is transversed by tubular canal as a groove on inner face of appendages with confluent edges opening distally near the tip and proximally near the base of the jaw. The labrum is deflected against the base of labium. The marginal ridge is held in a transverse groove of labial surface just behind a closure, thus forming a transverse preoral chamber, the cybarium. Its floor becomes the dorsal surface of the hypopharynx. The dorsal wall of cybarium is provided with strong dilators arising from clipeal region, and cybarial chamber become a preoral pump. The mouth lies in posterior wall of the cybarium. It leads to strongly musculated anterior pharynx. Then mandibulosuctorial mouthparts. The chewing mouthparts of this subtype are found in some Neuroptera and epidlines, antlions, etc. They have long fang-like jaws. Mandibles are deeply grooved on their ventral surfaces, but here closing lobes are long blades of maxillae which fit into mandibular grooves and thus forming the tubular channel between the two appendages through which the larva sucks juices of its victim. The maxillae undergo reduction in appendicular parts. The labium contains a middle plate differentiated into the submentum and mentum. That is the mandibulosuctorial mouthpart. Then comes the rasping sucking mouthpart. In Thysanoptera thrips, head bears a short, thick conical beak, often projecting downward. Extremely In Thysanoptera thrips, head bears a short, thick conical beak, often projecting downward. Externally, the beak is formed by a clipeus labrum in front and the maxilla, stipes on the sides, and the labium behind. The labrum is a broad triangular structure. The maxillae are long triangular structures bearing the palpi distally. The labium is wide, having a pair of short palpi distally. Within the beak are enclosed single elongated slender mandibular styles, two piercing maxillary lacinius stylets, and a short median lobular hypopharynx. The stylets are adapted to move in and out of the beak. All these parts form a piercing apparatus. Maxillary stylets are longer than the mandibular one. The lacinae fit together to form the food channel. Mandible, postmentum, stipes, prementum, hypopharynx, spinneret, maxilla, labrum. Food channel, mandible, antenna, eye. Then antenna, eye, left mandible, clipeus, right maxilla, hypopharynx, labium, labrum, left maxilla, maxillary palp. So, antennae, eye, left mandible, left maxilla, maxillary palp, right maxilla, hypopharynx, labium, labial palp, labrum, and clipeus. These are the rasping sucking mouthparts in thrips, Thysanoptera. Okay. The rasping sucking type of mouthparts are intermediate between the chewing, biting, and piercing sucking type. They are symmetrical due to absence of right mandible. The stylets are confined to base and individual pouches. They do not form a food canal and do not enter the wound deeply. Whereas the sap exuded on the surface is sucked by, or up by a cone-shaped mouth rather than stylets. The food canal lies between the labrum and hypopharynx within the head, and saliva passes to the tip of stylets between the hypopharynx and the labium. Feeding mechanism. The maxillary stylets articulate via a lever lying at proximal base of stipes and extend distally into the cavity of the mouth cone. Thrips grips the surface of leaf with the pretarsi, lifts its head and makes contact of its mouth cone with the leaf surface. The mandible is pulled out of mouth cone by clipiolabral muscle so that it punctures the surface of the leaf 4 to 5 times a second and retracts by the retractor muscle. Mandibles can penetrate only for a short distance, while maxillary stylets penetrate deeply by alternating contraction of the maxillary protractor and retractor muscle. The lacinate are protracted and cell sap is sucked by the action of cybarial pump into the food canal. In thrips, the cybarium is modified into a simple sucking pump. So the maxillary stylets articulate to a lever lying at proximal base of stipes and extend distally into the cavity of the mouth cone. The thrips grips the surface of leaf with the pretarsi, lifts its head and makes contact of its mouth cone with the leaf surface. The mandible is pulled out of mouth cone by clipiolabral muscle so that it punctures the surface of leaf 4 to 5 times a day, 5 times a second, so that it punctures the surface of leaf 4 to 5 times a second and retracts by the retractor muscle. Mandibles can penetrate only for a short distance, while maxillary stylets penetrate deeply by alternating contraction of the maxillary protractor and retractor consonant muscles. The lacunae are protracted and cell sap is sucked by the action of cybarial pump into the food canal. In thrips, the cybarium is modified into a simple sucking pump similar to the hemiptera. Its external aperture is directly continuous with the food canal of the beak. It is operated by the dorsal dilator muscle of the anterior frontal cephalic region. Then the piercing sucking mouthparts of piercing. A tube or jointed beak encloses needle-like stylets. The other tube is formed by the labium. The labium does not take any part in the piercing mechanism but simply serves as a protective covering of others. The mandibles and maxillae are the major components to sometimes supplemented or replaced by the labrum, epipharynx and hypopharynx. They are greatly elongated and slender structures like the needles which are mainly piercing the skin of an animal or the epidermis of a plant. They form a food canal or inner tube in which the liquid, blood, or sap is drawn in and supplied to the pharynx. The piercing sucking mouthparts of various types are described below, like a hemipteran one, hemipteran piercing sucking mouthparts. The beak is usually long and slender, segmented, and formed by the terminal labium. The labium lacks palpi and terminal lobes. The labrum is short and covers the basal part of the beak. The beak encloses 4 stylets only, 2 mandibular and remaining 2 maxillary. Both the mandibles are systematically developed and their apical parts are modified into long, slender stylets. They can be retracted or protracted by the retractor and protractor muscles, respectively. The lateral plates of maxillae are mostly incorporated into the head capsule. The palpi are lacking, and the maxillary stylets are long, slender needles like the mandibular ones. The salivary syringe is a powerful pump for ejecting the saliva. The salivary ducts opens on the tip of the hypopharynx. Both food canal and salivary canal of a beak lie between the closely opposed inner surfaces of the maxillary stylets. The hypopharynx is a median conical lobe projected into the proximal part of the beak between the bases of stylets. Dilator muscle, pharynx, cybarium, labrum, mandible, maxilla, labium, then galea, then salivary duct. These are the parts. Right mandible, right maxilla, food canal, left maxilla, left mandible, salivary duct. The sucking pump, the food channel or functional mouth, opens into the cavity of sucking pump or cybarium. It is a large oval chamber of which posterior and lateral walls are convex and strongly sclerotized, while anterior wall is flexible and deeply invaginated into the lumen of the chamber. On its midline are inserted 2 dilator muscles from postclipial plate of the head. Their contraction lifts the enfolded anterior wall and creates an upward suction through the tubular entrance to the chamber. Their relaxation brings the lifted wall to spring back into the lumen by the force of its own elasticity. By this mechanism, the liquid food is drawn into a pump chamber from the food canal of the beak and it is expelled upward into the anterior part of the stomoid. It represents preoral cybarium rather than buccal cavity or pharynx. Its floor is formed by the proximal part of anterior surface of hypopharynx and its roof by the epipharyngeal wall of the anticlypeus. The true mouth of an insect is represented by the inner opening of the pump, which opens into the sac like a true pharynx. Then, how is the feeding mechanism? The mandibular stylets are the chief piercing organs. They punctuate the food source, and then maxillary stylets are inserted in between the mandibular stylets, which suck the blood or sap through alternating several thrusts. At this time, insect stands almost on its head. So, in blood-sucking hemiptera, that, for example, Rhodnius, at first, the labrum is swung forward, approaching to its tip to the surface of the skin of the host. Immediately, the mandibles protract and retract alternatively and penetrate the skin. The mandibular stylets bear backward directly, teeth laterally, which acts like a saw during penetration. They penetrate a short distance and later on act as anchors for the tip of the labium so that maxillae are protracted between them. The maxillae penetrate deeply and saliva is discharged continuously from the tip of the maxillae. Both the stylets enter the food blood vessel and with the help of cybarium pump, the blood is sucked into the food canal made by both the maxillae. So in plant sap-sucking hemiptera like aphids through the set of stylets is similar. The feeding mechanism differs from that of the blood-sucking bugs. The mandibles penetrate to the plain plant tissue along with the maxillae. A short protraction of one of the mandibles is followed by the other, and these forwarding alternate actions of mandibles alternate with the maxillae. The maxillae of both the sides protract forward, and in this way, all four stylets advance forward. The feeding may be either intracellular or on the exuded contents of the damaged tissue. They may penetrate 1.5 mm to 50 mm in deep of the tissue, mostly approaching the phloem. Sieve tubes, which constitute along with the xylem the bulk of transporting tissue of the plant. The labium is telescopic, and as the styles bundle advances in the plant tissue, the labium shortens telescopically at the proximal joints so that short stylets can penetrate the tissue deeply. The terminal part of mandibles bears fine, short, backwardly directed teeth on the outer margin. In Cylidae, stylets are long and then protracted, are looped outside the head, while in scale insects and Cocoidea, they are looped into a long internal pouch. In Aradidae, they are coiled in a preoral cavity. In Cicadidae, like plant hoppers, maxillae are twice as long as the mandibles. So mandibles make initial penetration and maxillae make intracellular deep insertion. The Anopluran PSM. Three superimposed stylets are interlocated. They are a maxillae forming dorsal stylets, then hypopharynx, the middle stylets, labium, the ventral stylets. The mandibles are vestigial. The dorsal and ventral stylets are forked at the base. All parts are entirely withdrawn into a long slender pocket or sac in the head, concealed behind the pharynx during non-feeding period. The proboscis or rostrum or mouth cone is snout-like a visible sac formed from the labrum. It is armed internally with small curved hooklets that serve as anchorage when averted. It opens into a preoral cavity, which in turn opens into the dorsal sucking pump and ventral stylet sac. The sucking pump is a two-chambered structure. Anterior wall one is buccal cavity, while the posterior one is the pharynx. In feeding mechanism, the stylets are pushed forward by muscular action and firm attachment is made by means of the circlet or oral irreversible teeth. Salivary secretion is poured into the wound through the hypopharyngeal salivary canal, and the cybarial and pharyngeal pumps draw blood, which is transported through the food canal of maxillary stylet. Buccal funnel, teeth, mouth cone, pharynx, esophagus, stylet sac, stylet, dorsal, middle, ventral, food canal, salivary duct.